Welcome to I Love El Paso. This is an event that is sponsored annually by the Tom Lee Institute, in which we interview power couples about how they navigate marriage, family, and a successful career. Today we have with us Dee Adair Margo, and later on we're going to have their son, Don Margo, and his wife, Elizabeth, speak with us as well. We want to give a shout out to Rockstar Burger. They're having a watch party there and having a great time, I'm sure. Also, we want to say to our online listeners, feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and later on we'll be asking Dee and Adair those questions after the interviews. So welcome, Dee and Adair. Thank you so much for being with us. You guys are definitely the epitome of a power couple. You've both done so much, both professionally and for the community, and raised a beautiful family as well. So we're looking forward to hearing wisdom and stories about how you've navigated this very complex terrain that we call family life and career. And so how many years have you been married?
Well, in August 21st, 45 years.
Okay.
Correct, the math is correct.
That's good.
I was a math minor.
Yeah, oh, there you go. There you go. And so, Dee, you know, you guys are really, they say opposites attract. And I think you guys are kind of the epitome of that. You're two very different personalities. And so how do you guys navigate that? You're quite, and you know, there's quite a lot of interesting dynamics between the two of you.
It's a left brain, right brain, so why don't you explain the difference, what we talk about, what you say about it.
We always, you know, we're a whole brain marriage.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
And you need both parts. I mean, I think you're enriched when you have both parts and have respect for the other part, and not think that the other part should be just like you.
Right, yeah.
Because we both know we're better off with each other.
Right.
And she tells me that regularly.
Okay, there you go. So I presume you're the left brain and Adair's the right brain, right?
That's
in terms of the
pretty good
creativity
assumption.
and the
Pretty good
logical. And so does that ever get, you know, irritating or hard to navigate sometimes when you're both maybe see things very differently?
Well, I'll say Dee is very good about noticing how he can make it better and more palatable for him. For instance, when we bought a house, I always had a habit of spreading out all over the place. So I have my pile in the kitchen, my pile here, and work more in a circular fashion, where he's probably he is more linear. So when we built our house, I mean, we'd lived in the old house for many years. He'd put up with it, but I am as far away from his office as you can get. and he built, and it really was better. I wouldn't have known it for myself, but he made a small office for me. So I'm kind of confined to a smaller space. And so he's been very good to be able to, he's strategic, he's observant, he executes well. So he's helped me in areas like that, to not just for myself, but so that I'm not an irritant to him, as much of an irritant.
That sounds harsh.
No, it's not.
And I want people to know that there are no bars on her doors or anything else. I mean, we don't lock the keys. We don't lock the door. It just, yeah, I'm a little more regimented, and it works out that way. But you learn how to adapt over time, and you determine what's important. And is it the little things that drive you nuts that are important, or the big things that cause you to come together? And so sometimes they're out of whack. We all had that. I certainly won't sit here and say we've never had a disagreement. But you understand over time that that what's important is important, and you work at that.
So how do you, if you disagree on something, how do you manage that disagreement? Is there a strategy that you use about things you do and not do, or is that it's just more of a natural thing that you've kind of worked out over the years?
It's probably the latter, the natural. You know, I grew up in a family. My father used to do with my mother the silent treatment. That was really not conducive, I didn't think, to much. And they ended up divorcing after 37 years.
Wow.
And I said sometimes they should have been divorced a lot sooner, although I'm not in favor of divorce. But you know, I just tried to learn from what I observed and how basically not to be as opposed to how to be.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, especially if we grew up in families that weren't quite as functional, we say, I never want to do that, or I'm going to avoid doing that as much as possible, definitely. How about you, Adair?
Well, I've always been grateful to Dee for he's always wanted to get things out on the table. We've never, you know, had that, and he said right away, and I think it's from growing up the way he did, we will not walk on eggshells in our home. So we are always very good about getting it out.
Right.
And, you know, you work over time at how you go about that and how Dee is, I tend to be much more spontaneous. I think sometimes he's much more thoughtful, thinking about things and then waiting for the right moment to say something, which can have a much bigger impact.
But that didn't always occur. You learn from your mistakes.
You learn from your mistakes.
You learn from your mistakes.
You learn from yeah. So that didn't happen always, but, you know, it's, and he was someone too who would be thoughtful enough when our children were having difficulties. He would write notes to them and put them under their door. I mean, that kind of thoughtfulness rather than just kind of off the cuff responses.
Well, that's very interesting, you know, and I think something that would be very powerful for children, you know, to get a note addressing an issue or whatever, you know, the situation was. So the two of you met at Vanderbilt, right?
Correct.
And so my understanding, according to Adair, you know, you pursued her, right?
It's true.
It's true. There you have
true.
it. Okay.
Without a doubt, it's true.
So what was it about her? Did you meet her in class, at a party, or what? And what said, wow, she's my girl?
It was a blind date.
A blind date? Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It was a blind date. I was a senior. I was there on a football scholarship. She was a sophomore. And a couple, a friend of mine who was a baseball player, a fraternity brother, and we were involved in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes together. And his to-be wife, his girlfriend, fiance at the time, was Adair's year, and they fixed us up along with some others on a blind date. But the irony of it is, I don't know if it was ironic, but I'd gotten hurt. I'd torn my knee up first practice after our first game my senior year. And I was on crutches awaiting surgery for medial collateral ligament repair. And that's when I was going to have a date with Adair. So we arranged this date, but then her father comes into town. I don't remember whether it was planned or not planned. And he ends up hosting the dinner at an Irish pub, and she includes her roommates there. So here I am meeting her for the first time, sophomore, I'm a senior. I'm sitting at one end of the table. Her father sits at the other end of the table, and in between are her roommates, Adair and her roommates. It was very different, to say the least. I wasn't used to that, especially in college. And then we went out to TGI Fridays, which was across from campus. And I sat there listening to Adair tell me about all the guys she'd dated elsewhere. It was a very interesting evening.
I can't believe he liked me.
And but I don't know. I was smitten from day one. I was smitten.
One.
But that was the truth. That was exactly the conversation.
Like
But there was just something there, and I determined that I was going to pursue that.
What was your first impression of Dee?
You know, I mean, he was very handsome. I remember he always wore baker's pants. That's before you had your cast.
That was after I had my cast.
Cast,
I had
yeah,
no
after.
chance.
But of course, he's on crutches, and
I had a cast from my hip all the way down to my ankle, and it was on
Right.
crutches and a golf cart, because back then we didn't have arthroscopic. This is 1973. We didn't have arthroscopic surgery.
But of course, I had all my friends there too, and my dad, and you know, when anybody's dad comes to town, everybody wants a free meal. So of course, I invite everybody, and that's kind of been the story of our lives too, where Dee would always want our house to kind of be a sanctuary, and I'd turn it into Grand Central Station. So even on that first date, I turned that first date kind of a little bit into a Grand Central Station. But he was, and you know, I'd gone to Vanderbilt. There weren't that many girls at Vanderbilt, many more boys. So I had many more dates than I did growing up here in El Paso, because there weren't that many girls, you know. So I'm sure I did talk about them. I was preoccupied probably with that at that time, my freshman year, because gee, sophomore year, you know, gee, I'm going out.
Yeah, right. So how long did it take before you guys became a couple?
We didn't become a couple until we got engaged.
Oh, wow.
In November of 1975.
Oh, really, that long?
No, I was chasing for 3 years. In fact, as I asked one of her roommates who was a buddy, I said, am I beating a dead horse? I mean, I think in the nomenclature today with social media, I was friended. Is that I think that's the phrase. But
you're not in the relationship.
No, yeah, I think that's the way I was told, that she basically just friended me for several years. I'd say tooled me, but we won't get into that. But you know, I wasn't going to give up.
You persevered.
I was going to hang in there as long as I could until I was convinced there was no hope.
Well, looking back, it was really sweet, very sweet, and I've always trusted Dee, even when I was running away from him. But he wanted to be very honest, and so he told me we were getting married on the second date.
Oh my!
And so,
which I don't recommend, by the way.
Yeah, you don't recommend. And you look at this picture of us. It's kind of we've got a little caricature, but you know, I was just having a good time and off to college, and of course my dad wanted me to date around, and you know, I was not nearly as mature or ready. He talked about the couple who introduced us. Well, Kathy White would sit in her room across the street from my dorm room and write out Mrs. James Edward White. I was no more thinking about getting married than the man in the moon. I mean, wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but be a career woman. All my roommates ended up going to New York City. I got married. You know, it was like I expected. Your life doesn't always unfold the way you anticipate. And a lot of times it's better. I've often thought I've been saved from myself in many ways. So I'm very glad Dee came into my life. But it did take me a long time, because he had been so honest, really, too early at expressing his feelings.
Right.
So
when did you decide to propose to her? Was there any indication that
I never proposed.
Oh, but what did you do?
he limited options.
Oh, okay.
I did an assumptive close, as we say in the sales game. I wasn't sure where I stood many times, and I had taken her and her sister, who was at Vanderbilt at the same time now, to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where my parents had moved to from Alabama when I went to high school. And so I said, would you like to go look at rings? And if she said no, then I didn't propose. Safe, you know, no ego shot there.
Right.
And she said yes. So we went out, and I took my life savings, probably, I think it was like $350 at the time, and we bought a ring that she eventually lost, but that's the way it goes.
You've actually replaced it several times, right?
Yes, several times.
Right. Yeah. So, Adair, what were you thinking when he said, "Do you want to go look at rings"?
Well, you know, as I said, I trusted Dee, and I really liked him a lot. And so when he put it that way, it's like, well, yeah, you know, let's go look at it. I, of course, didn't know what he was doing, but he had learned to do things in an indirect manner. So I just said yes. And then I was very happy to go back, and when we did become engaged, and announce it at school, which was my senior year. See, I was more ready to think about settling down than I was 2 years prior.
Right. So your mom kind of had a hand in
She did.
Dee.
My mom had a huge hand. Not as my mother was never like a meddling mother at all, or never. We never even hardly talked about boys. She'd always kind of put it down when I was growing up at home. You know, I'd say so and so's going with so and so, and she goes, "Well, where are they going?" You know, she'd always put it down a little bit and not encourage. But when Dee had come out to visit me, both my parents really liked Dee. And when she had come, my parents had come to visit Vanderbilt later after he had come to our home, he was out with this beautiful girl from Dallas. And I was there with my parents and just walking around the campus. And my mother saw him and spoke. Of course, they all spoke. We all did. But the only thing my mother said was very brief, but she just said, "I wouldn't be so cocky if I were you." That's all she said, and never said anything else.
She's my buddy.
But it was an awakening call, and it's one of Dee's traits too. It's like you wait for the right moment and say something instead of nagging someone or saying something. That's all she said. But it was enough for me to begin thinking, you know, well, gosh, if my mom, who is I always admired for her judge of character and her own character, if she said that, I better start waking up.
Taking it seriously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you got married, you decided to live in El Paso at that time, or did you live somewhere else?
Well, we were in Nashville. No, when I graduated and I was still chasing her, I thought I was going to go to law school. I mean, I'd started out in pre-med, med chemistry, and was defeated. Spent a few semesters on academic probation. The dean and I became very intimate. But anyway, I decided to try to do law school. And so the two law schools that I was accepted to were outside of Nashville. And I didn't have any money anyway. My parents didn't have any resources, so I was on a full ride scholarship, so that's how I got through. I started looking for a job in Nashville so I could be near Vanderbilt. And it didn't matter that I'd graduated from Vanderbilt, it didn't matter that I'd played football. I couldn't find a job. 1974 was a recession year, and literally the only job I could find, and this was from May until almost July through June, and I interviewed everywhere, was an offer in the life insurance business from two different companies. And I chose to join the John Hancock Mutual Life Insurance Company at a compensation of $350 every 2 weeks for 6 months.
Wow.
And that was the only thing that was guaranteed, was for 6 months at $350 each. And so I started in the insurance business in I think it was like July 7th, 1974.
Wow.
He would call me between cold calls
Yeah.
to hear
Telephoning.
That's a tough-
a nice voice.
Yeah, that's a tough business. And so you were in Nashville and you were at Vanderbilt at the time?
I was
or you
still in
had your
college.
Yeah, right. And so when you got married, where did you locate to?
Well, we were living in a duplex in Nashville because that's where I parked myself after graduation. And we started living there, and then after I graduated there I'd gotten her a teaching job at a small Christian academy there outside of Nashville called Brentwood Academy, where she was teaching art. She had an art history major, and so we got married in August of '76, and then she started teaching when we came back. And then immediately, I think it was around Labor Day, her dad started recruiting me to come to work for him, for him and with him in El Paso. And but he had talked about doing it the following summer. And when we finally came to terms after several months, I agreed to come the following summer after Adair had finished her teaching contract for the first year. Well, he calls in, I can't remember if it was December or January, December of '76 or January of '77, and says, "I need you now." I said, "I can't come." I mean, Adair has it. We're newlyweds. We've only been married 4 months. And he says, "I got to have you now." And I remember I had mixed feelings. I didn't want to, but I ended up leaving Nashville and showing up here. I think I showed up here on February the 28th of 1977 and started work on March 1st with the John D. Williams Company, and as a straight commission salesman. But I told Adair, I thought it was a great opportunity for us, and so we came here. And one of the big things, I grew up moving almost every 3 years. It wasn't quite every 3 years, but just about. And I hated that, and I wanted roots. And I thought this was an opportunity to give me roots, to give us roots. So she actually didn't want to come back. She wanted to stay in Nashville.
Because I'd always been here,
Yeah,
you know.
and I was starting.
I hadn't been uprooted.
I was starting to do reasonably well in the insurance business. And, you know, I was doing things for better. So, but I just said, I think it's an opportunity for us. I think it's a providential opportunity, and we're going to take advantage of it.
Right. Yeah. So when you came to El Paso, did you start working again, or you were trying to figure out what you were going to do?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, after we moved, I moved back. I finished my teaching contract, and what I ended up doing when we got back was, well, I got involved in the community almost right away, and I ended up going back to school to get a master's degree at New Mexico State University in art history. And which was a wonderful opportunity. I had studied Italian Renaissance art, studied in Italy. I had this concept that most everything I loved was in Italy. And going up to New Mexico State, I ended up doing my master's thesis on the mission in Juarez. And that was the beginning, the architecture, Franciscan mission architecture. It was the beginning of the scales falling off my eyes of just what's here, how rich really it is, and how few people knew about it. So I did go back to school, and then I had my son Wake. I used to take him up to school. I worked as a slide librarian at New Mexico State so I could get in-state tuition. And then I had Don later on. So we started having a family. And I was going to school, and then I went to work. After I graduated, a man named Frank McKnight, who had a frame shop up on Stanton where Gio Jeske is now. It's called Galleria Colonial. He had asked me to come to work as his art consultant. He did framing. He wanted some help in selling art, which I went to work for him. And that was the beginning of getting the idea I might have an art gallery someday.
What role did your faith play in your marriage or deciding to get married? Was it important to both of you?
It was the basic foundation. I mean, I had done a 180 my junior year in college, and I had determined I was going to be different than I had been previously, and that's one of the reasons I was so honest with her about how I felt, because I'd played games for too long with too many others, and so I mean, I don't think a marriage can survive without a spiritual foundation, and we were blessed by that because there are many challenges, and the biggest one that first hit was right after my 29th birthday, when my father-in-law passed away prematurely at age 60 of a heart attack. And we had no perpetuation plan, and I had to kind of take over the business and buy the business from the estate and run it. I mean, at the time there were only 6 employees, so it wasn't anything massive running it, but I had never even looked at the financials. So that was the real first crisis. Adair was pregnant with Don, and I mean, it was, if we hadn't had a spiritual foundation, I don't know that I would have survived. And then you carry it forward to the last couple of years here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that I would have survived without it.
Yeah. So, you know, it really, you've always kind of gone to church together and that sort of thing, taking your children to church?
If I hadn't had a change in my life, I've said this before, not only would have Adair never married me, she would have never gone out with me. Okay? Right. I was kind of a wild, woolly athlete and football player, and I was into partying and other things. But I mean, my faith became preeminent.
Right. So when you, I don't know, Adela has been with you guys for a long time, right? For quite a while, and she's kind of been your housekeeper and sort of, nanny to the boys and so forth. What would Adela say about life with the Margo family? I know you've told me some of her interesting impressions at times.
Well, one thing, in fact, I said this to the new president of UTEP when we went on a trip to Mexico with her. But Adela, when Dee, I thought he was being hard on me, and I'd make a comment like, Dee, you do not have to be so hard on me. You just don't have to be. And Adela looked at me and she said, "You need it."
Oh my!
So to have a third voice in the family, she was so much more. She was family. Her daughter Monica grew up with our boys.
Monica's my third, for all intents and purposes.
It was a wonderful opportunity for us to have Monica and Adela live with us. And of course, I had an art gallery. I was a working mom, and so I taught Adela how to drive and how to use credit cards, and do all kinds of things. And she really, I used to introduce her as my wife. I say, this is my husband, and this is my wife, Adela.
Right.
And but all together, it was really a great team.
We were blessed.
We were blessed with her.
Second mom to the boys and family and everything else. And
Yeah.
we're still close. We're all
Right,
still
yeah,
close.
She still comes to.
right.
I mean, we're all still close. Yeah, it's family.
Yeah, she's a neat lady.
She's a very noble person.
Yes. So, you sort of had this business thrust into your lap. I mean, you had to buy it and so forth, and had to work very hard. So, what do you attribute to your success? I mean, you've been extremely successful.
The good Lord is merciful, but you surround yourself with people brighter than you are, and in my case, that was pretty easy to grow a business. And then, but I also always looked for a certain value structure. I didn't give a litmus test on certain things, but I wanted a certain Judeo-Christian ethical foundation, and I wanted a work ethic that was comparable to that. So that's really what I looked for. And I made a decision early on. I don't know how I arrived at this, but we made some acquisitions. We actually were, in 1984, we became the largest regional broker by a large acquisition when we went from, I think it was 6 employees to 125 at the time. It changed over time. It was 115 or 125, but it was like Jonah swallowing the whale, as one of my partners said. But I made a decision that when we analyzed the acquisition and the holes that needed to be filled with certain areas, we made a decision that I could find trained people within those particular areas, but I couldn't always find the value structure that I wanted with that particular individuals that were available. And so I made the decision, irrespective of the cost to do that, to hire the people I wanted from their character and their commitment, and then train them, which took us longer and it was more expensive and everything else. But over the long haul, and as I look back, that was exactly what we should have done, and we did.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very key insight for people who are trying to grow a business. Very important. So, Adair, how was it? I mean, he must have been very wrapped up in the business, and then he incredibly involved in the community. You started Paso del Norte Foundation, and
well, I was just I was part of the other
young
stuff. I just was
YPO,
a participant. YPO is involved in the Young Presidents Organization.
So you just were involved in a lot of things. You had to be away a lot of evenings, maybe weekends. So how did that work out? How did Dee manage to still remain involved from your perspective, or was it difficult?
Well, of course, we had Adela at home, so to be able to kind of come and go and have this stable person and nanny in your home was really alleviated a lot of that.
Right.
But I think all of us knew how much Dee loved us. He just had a lot, especially because he was commuting to Washington after my dad died. One reason my dad had wanted him to come is so my dad had a client in Washington that started here as consultants with White Sands Missile Range and became a big company.
Yeah, we had an office in Washington, and I'd spend a week a month up there. That was literally required based on the size of this I guess you'd call it almost a multinational
Right.
in what they were. So, but the mistakes I made were, I mean, I was putting in 60 plus hours a week, and I was leaving in the morning, and I was not getting back till almost 9 o'clock at night, and the kids would be in bed. And that was wrong. I should have been home for dinner. And I mean, today I had to work at the office because you didn't have computers back then that you could take home. I didn't have iPads or cell phones or anything else when we were doing this. And but I remember telling people we would hire, I don't expect you to put in 60 hours a week. I expect you to get the work done and manage it, but I want you home with your families, and you need to have dinner with your family. And that was because I didn't do that. And I mean, I spent most evenings coming in, eating leftovers, standing over the kitchen sink, which is a habit I still have today, but we won't get into that.
We sat down last night.
Right. Yeah, so some people might say, well, that's why you were successful, is because you put in the time and worked so hard. So would you have taken less success and more time with your family? Or, I mean, if you were...
I didn't have that choice. It wasn't a choice. We had made acquisitions, and with the acquisitions came a lot of debt. And so in order to survive, I had to do certain things. So it was a matter, are you gonna survive, or are you gonna, do that? I didn't have the flexibility to do that. Had I had the flexibility, I would have probably made different decisions, and maybe done it. But no, we had lots of debt that was corporately and personally guaranteed by me.
Yeah.
And so
You felt a lot of pressure.
oh yeah, you can say that was an understatement.
Right.
But that's another thing about Dee. He never brought it home. And he always slept at night. And he never shared concerns from the office at home.
Oh, that's interesting.
So he helped create a sanctuary at home where I would have been uptight if I'd been informed, or if he'd used me as an ear. So I always really appreciated that about him.
Right. So how do you handle your stress, Dee? I've never seen you anything but extremely calm.
Oh, that's not the way it is all the time, by a long shot. No, I have, I do a daily quiet time and Bible study and things like that, and I try to, people talk about meditation. I do prayer, and I work out. I try to work out, which helps on the stress, but also trying to put things in perspective. And when you've gone through as many things as we've gone through experientially, you learn that you can get uptight for equipment, but it passes, and it usually gets resolved. And sometimes it gets resolved without doing anything. And I learned that too, where early on, no, I had to dictate it. I had to, one of my challenges and curses is that I have a propensity to see what's wrong with something before I ever see what's right with it. Now that helps if you're intent, needing to do things or whatever, but at a certain point in time, you got to switch. And that's something I still work on. But that's my nature is to kind of see what needs to be done, and so I mean it's been applicable throughout, even as a mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a good trait to have
Right.
for governance and a lot of the things that he's done.
well, you were a state representative and then became mayor of El Paso. What made you decide to take on mayor? Being a mayor is kind of a thankless job. I mean, you can never really win in politics. You're always dealing with problems and people and criticism and that kind of thing. What made you decide to take that on?
Well, I spent 35 years as a CEO, basically running a business, so I'm really not a politician. People will tell you I'm not a politician.
Smile, honey.
But I ran for the legislature because I've been head of the El Paso Chamber of Commerce, and I was going down to Austin to represent the business community, and I saw what at that time was a very dysfunctional state delegation from El Paso. There was a lot of internecine warfare between some of our state reps and our state senator, and there was all this stuff, and I didn't think we were being well represented across the state. I mean, here we are, the sixth largest city in the state of Texas, and we had what I would term a dysfunctional legislative representation. And so I decided well, you know, I was cocky and stupid, and I thought I could, you know, I'd finished the chairmanship of the chamber, and I thought I was reasonably well known, and I'd been involved in civic things, and we were doing the Border Fund, which at the time and became Operation Noel, the Coach for Kids, and I was doing all this other stuff, and I'd been involved civically across, and I thought I had a fair name recognition. Well, I didn't. But I ran for Senate, lost in '06, and then in '08, I decided to continue. You know, I'd kind of done it. I ran for state representative, won the primary and lost the general election, and then ran again in 2010. So if you add them all up, I've lost more than I've won. That's a fact. But after I lost my reelection for state representative in 2012, I was asked to step into. People remember when Garcia, the superintendent of the El Paso Independent School District, was sent to jail for credit manipulation, and the Commissioner of Education replaced the entire all the trustees for EPISD, and appointed a board of managers, and he appointed me as one of the 5 board of managers, and as president of the board of managers. And so what I ended up doing was, for 2 years, we were limited at the time by the state limitations. I really wanted 3 years, but we were limited to 2 years at that time. Now you can have up to 4, as a turnaround for the El Paso Independent School District. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was like a $500 million business turnaround, the 10th largest school district in the state of Texas, and at the time had 60,000 students. So we revamped everything, policies and procedures, curriculum and instruction, you name it, audit, internal audit, everything. Everything was totally revamped. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And we did a complete turnaround and covered a $20 million deficit without raising taxes. And then when I finished that in 2015, people started coming to me and asked me to consider running for mayor. So that's how it happened.
Yeah.
But you know, I just care deeply about this community. It has nothing to do. I really don't have political aspirations. I'm like a CEO problem solver.
Yeah.
And that's, one thing about Dee, you know, he kind of gets in there because he wants to do something, not because he wants to be someone, but because he wants to do something.
Right.
And what I love, although he has a short period, usually he does, because of just the way that politics tend to be here, is that when he gets in, people don't think they like him, and then they realize, and he went as a Republican of all things, but then they're there. And I had all of them come up and say, I didn't think I was like your husband, but I sure did. Because he was there for the team. He played offensive. I never saw him play football, but he was an offensive guard, and it's really what he is. He's not about himself. He's about playing offense for other people. And so he'd help all the Democrats in a Republican state to get their legislation passed. And it's one thing we learned really with BDM in Washington, because we had this client in Washington. They supported, I mean, you went to the White House when Jimmy Carter was there. We went to the White House when Reagan was there. I mean, they wanted supporters on both sides. It's not like only when the Democrats are in and then you stop until you get a Democrat again. You've got to keep working the whole time. So that's why it's so important to be bipartisan. And he set a great example for that in the legislature. And then, you know, in being mayor, I'm very grateful he was there when we went through our 3 crises.
Oh, yeah.
So he kind of gets in and shows you. I mean, a lot of people have said, and he heard from people all over the country, you know, saying, I wish you could be our mayor. One fellow wrote from New York saying that he was so fed up with politics, he'd moved to Vietnam. But he'd come back, and he said he saw Dee on TV after the shooting, and he said, I realized I shouldn't remove myself from politics. I should look for people like you, people who love your representative government, not political representation for a party, but loving your constituents, being there for your constituents, leading your constituents through tragedy, and so that made it all worthwhile.
Right. What about child rearing? What was your philosophy of child rearing, and who played what role?
Well, I have some facetious comments I could make, but I better not.
Well,
because
we'd
people will
love to
take-
hear 'em.
No, people will take it wrong.
Yeah, people
No,
take it
no, they
seriously.
take it seriously. No, I told my sons, and I think that Don will agree with this, that I said, I don't know how to be a good dad, but on the basis of prayer and effort, I'll do the best I can. And that's because I don't think my grandfather was my dad's father was a very successful orthopedic surgeon from the Rio Grande Valley, but in Oklahoma City. But that was not very close. And
He left his Hispanic family.
and so I don't think my dad really knew how to be real close. He was there, but he didn't know affection per se, I guess I'd say, or whatever. And I just, my position was, we're going to hug all the time. We're going to hug every time I see him. We're going to hug. Now, under COVID, we've had some limitations on that hugging and stuff, but I just, I didn't know how to do it, and I was just trying to do the best I could, and sometimes I was successful, and many times I wasn't, but we did the best we could.
And Adair, how about you as a mom?
Well, they called me La Niña. They called me La Niña, but I was the more lenient one. Of course, Dee had grown up also in a family where, his brother, it wasn't good. When you don't grow up with those problems, so often you're not aware of them, so you just let things go. And I tended to be more relaxed. Don will probably tell you some horror stories about me letting him hold onto my doors. I let him roller skate from my car. Stupid stuff, but
a lot of fun.
A lot of fun, and they always came to my gallery and openings, and we had a good time as a family growing up. And El Paso is a great place to be.
Right. So what advice would you give to young people now who have a lot of challenges raising young children? What would you say to them?
Oh, try to be consistent, be honest, learn from your mistakes, and reinforce what you do right. I think that's the best we can do. I love being a grandparent because I don't have to deal with some of the things. Our oldest just had a newborn, our second grandson, in November of last year, and we just got back from visiting him and his wife and the baby for the first time this past week. And I've told him, I said, I want Ian, my grandson at 3 months old, I said, I hope he grows up to be exactly like you, exactly like you. Do everything you did growing up, so that you might have a little empathy for the challenges that and the decisions I had to make.
Right.
But anyway, I really don't necessarily recommend that. Yeah. But it's just it's you don't know. I mean, I love to Darren, I love to watch the way Don and Elizabeth raise their children. I mean, they do such a better job than we.
I said, I wish I'd known Don before I had him, and known Elizabeth before I had my children, but I would have learned a lot from them.
So, I don't think anybody's got the market cornered, and kids are different, and the personalities. I just love figuring out the personalities for each of your children, and how they function, and what motivates them, and how you can provide limitations. So it's a work in progress. It still is.
Right. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for this time, and now we're going to bring Don and Elizabeth on, and then we'll bring you back to answer questions. So just if you can remove your microphones, that would be good. Okay, welcome back. We have Don and Elizabeth Margo with us, the Margo's youngest son. And what was it like growing up in the Margo household?
Let's see. I mean, it was a very loving household. Grew up at the same home just up here on Blacker Street. I remember just a lot of bustling activity. There were a lot of parties and events. My mom had very different people. I got to meet some very interesting artists. That there were always people staying in our guest house, and then my dad would have parties with insurance people coming over, very conservative. But Adela was really the glue in the house. I mean, she was like this calming presence, but there was certainly a lot of bustle.
Yeah, right. And so they were pretty different as styles of parenting, right, as they have said. What was it like? How did you experience your dad and your mom's styles differently?
Let's see. I mean, my dad was definitely more the disciplinarian. I certainly was spanked as a young child, but I don't remember any of that. As my mom, it was the letters. My brother and I, we still kind of joke about them today. We hated having them, but that was more powerful than any spanking or anything else anyone could do. And then my mom Adela was the one who nicknamed her La Nina, but she gave us a lot of fun things to do, and she did take me out on my roller skates and pull me around on the side of her car. And I vividly remember my dad coming out, yelling, he's gonna fall and you're gonna run him over, which probably was a high risk activity. She also tied a rope to the banister of our second story so that my brother and I could swing like Indiana Jones. So yeah, it was interesting.
Well, yeah, it definitely sounds like two very different personalities, but made life interesting and rich, that's for sure. So what you said the letters were the things that really got to you. So what kinds of things would he write in, like an example of when he wrote you a letter, and kind of what did he say and how did you feel about it?
I mean, it usually involved some passage from the Bible that spoke to whatever the situation might have been, and typically an expression of some disappointment, which is pretty powerful coming from somebody that you always looked up to and wanted to impress, and so that was typically the message.
Right. So did he want you to talk about it with him afterwards, or how did the disciplinary process work out? He just let you sort of be with that letter?
I think, as I remember it, that's really all it took. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. My mom was right when she said we don't walk on eggshells in the house. I mean, we were brutally honest across the board. Probably sometimes too much so. When someone new like Elizabeth comes into the picture, it seems like nobody cares about the other person. You guys, it was just like ripping into each other. But it's kind of the way it was.
Right. What did you think about all this, Elizabeth, when you first were getting to know the Margo family?
I mean, it was pretty daunting. Especially, it's daunting to be a new girlfriend and new to a family in general. And I don't know, anybody who's met the Margos, they're people that are admirable. You want them to like you. I wanted them to like me. And so thankfully, we gelled. I don't think there was ever a time that I felt uncomfortable with them. I think I can't speak to exactly how I felt in the beginning, but what I can say is that the feeling I can remember is that it was very refreshing, because I think, I kind of grew up in an eggshell walking home, and it's a beautiful thing once you're in a situation where, the light shines on everything that everyone's feeling, even if it's not maybe what you want to hear. And it's changed. I mean, it's set a foundation for our relationship and for our family. So maybe it was scary, but it was a good thing ultimately. I think it made this happen. So.
Right. So do you think your parents loved you or Wake better?
Well, I think my mom definitely loved Wake more. But no, No, I think we both were loved pretty equally.
Their personalities, I mean, he won't say this, but their personalities, it's funny because they're so different. There are similarities for sure, but Wake has more tendencies that you would expect in a younger child, and Dawn is kind of the very, followed the rules, and so they kind of align a little bit. You talked about the whole brain marriage earlier, and they kind of align a little bit with their parents in that way. They both have things of each, which is why they're both such special men. But I think Dawn is kind of more of the orderly, what you expect from Dee, and Adair. Wake and Adair are kind of more gregarious and, less structured. So it's neat to see how they've turned out with both of the parents' influences. But yeah.
So what kind of memorable things did you do as a family? Traditions or memorable trips, activities, something, or maybe even just something you did every day?
I'd say, the first we all went to the Grand Canyon. We stayed in a Motel 6. It was, and I just remember family trips.
Oh, okay.
And then, with my dad being part of YPO, there's some really memorable international trips where they set up activities for the kids, while Dad was doing business sessions or what have you. But really, we did. We're kind of homebodies in general. I'm still that way to this day. So I think my dad was a lot like I am now, and you just really can't enjoy it if you're gone too long. I'm like more of a 4-day weekend kind of guy. But those were good memories.
Were there any family traditions that you had that you can think of? I know your dad was gone a lot, as he said, and he wished he...
He was gone, but I remember him showing up to every football game. I remember him coming out to middle school to teach me how to throw shot put and teach our entire team. He participated in track. He was definitely there, but certainly worked hard. But I would say,
The holidays.
Yeah, certainly the holidays. My mom. We always loved that. Actually, my mom used to decorate for the holidays with candy, up and down the banister, and then my dad would typically read about the birth of Jesus from the Bible, and then they probably don't even remember this, but then Monica, Adela's daughter Monica, my sister, Wake and I were tasked with having to act it out. So we'd go and dress up and come back and act it out. So I do remember that.
That's cute. Have you carried over any of those traditions in your own family?
I push traditions
Elizabeth
on,
does.
because my family was very traditional. Everybody made a big deal about birthdays and Hallmark holidays and all that stuff. So I kind of push that on everybody else. But it's fun. We always manage to find reasons to get together. So.
But yeah, if it were left to me, they probably wouldn't exist. But Elizabeth is good about pushing those, and there's some of the things about
Kind of the glue holding all those things together.
She is.
Yeah. How are they as grandparents? What are they like with the kids?
They're awesome. I will say that, they always were, involved with the kids. It's such a blessing. I have several friends that are transplants like I am. I'm not from El Paso originally, so my family's not here. So it's so nice because they have always been so involved with our children. And I can't think of a time I ever have called and asked for their help that they didn't drop whatever they were doing to be with the children. And and a big example of that is our second daughter, Emma, unexpectedly was born with a birth defect that required a long hospital stay and a couple of surgeries. And there is no way we would have had the bandwidth to have our not even 2-year-old at home with us in the midst of all that, and they just took her. We didn't even have to worry about it. Liliana was with her grandparents and well loved and well taken care of. And I will say for the, all the horrors of this pandemic, a silver lining, of course, a lot of people have felt there's, the closeness that you've been able to have. And now, we've been able to we can't go out,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
so we've been able to have the kids spend a lot of time with them of late.
Oh.
And I think that's a beautiful thing for them, because we can get bogged down so much in the day-to-day and the schoolwork and all of that, and they can focus on the bigger picture. And I think it makes their childhood richer for having grandparents like them.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, well, certainly they get a lot of sugar and a lot of TV time, but I do enjoy watching what my mom adds to their lives the same way I remember her doing it for us. Like, whether it was, I mean, she'd introduced me to Phil Goodell, who's a geologist at UTEP, and he helped me with my science fair project. Well, she's taking Liliana horseback riding, and then taking her out to see the dinosaur tracks, and going to see different artists, and they're just experiencing different things that they never know about this community. My mom has such a passion for the region.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So now we're going to once again transition and have take some questions for your dad and mother-in-law. Okay, we're back once again, and we have some questions from our audience. And one question that someone said was, Dee, have you ever considered writing a book about your interesting time as mayor?
No, not really. I mean, it's kind of ironic. I'm still getting interview requests to talk about things such as immigration, the shooting, things like that, and I'll be doing some interviews in the next few days. And I've been asked to be a participant in an HBO special related to immigration, I think it is, and what we've gone through. And I will continue to try to represent El Paso as best I can, even post-mayor, given the experiences we've gone through. But we're just a unique community, and what I learned as mayor that I didn't really learn as a state representative is that we're just an unknown jewel. People don't know who we are, where we are, or what we're about. And I took that on as my mantra to try to make sure people understood that we're more than the 6th largest city in the United States, in Texas, and the 21st largest city in the United States. We're the largest U.S. city on the Mexican border in a region of 2.7 million people. We're very unique, with a history dating back well over 350 years.
Yeah, definitely. So,
You should write a book. I
yeah,
think
right, that's a good idea.
idea.
Right. In both of you have had many, many years of public service. Is there a particular moment that really resonates that it was all worth it, or I never want to do this again?
Well, I've been gratified by the response I've had from city staff and other staffers and those who've remained in contact with me during my tenure, and it's been gratifying. I was just doing the best I could. There were a lot of things I didn't know. Now I understand. I think we have a great administration. I think Tommy Gonzalez, as our city manager, does an excellent job in coordination and all the challenges we've had. Carla Neiman is the city attorney, and then you take Mario D'Agostino as our emergency operations center chief of fire chief, and he's had to deal with not only the immigration expansion, but all the COVID and the distributions and the logistics and everything else, and they've done a great job. And then you take Chief Greg Allen, and we're still ranked as one of the safest cities in the United States, and that's a direct result of his leadership and the hiring and the training that he does with our police department. So I think I've been gratified by those relationships at all levels.
How about you, Adair, in terms of your years of public service? I mean, you served under President Bush. You've done so many different things. Is there a time when you've thought, this is really worth it? I'm really glad I'm doing all this.
Well, I think what I've learned through all my experience, especially like international serving on UNESCO and things like that, is that I was so involved here in El Paso, Juarez. And no matter where I went in the world, they didn't have what we had here. And I used to think when I'd go to these fancy meetings, in Paris and, down in Mexico City and things like that, that if they did, like FMAP and working with Lupe de la Vega in Juarez and my love of Juarez and going to the mission and doing tours and things like that, if they did, they wouldn't have time to argue about whose wine was better, which I heard lots of stuff like that in international meetings. It was more about competition really than about serving each other and what you can learn about an international border where, I used to share in Washington, not only, yes, we have a lot of migrants who come up and use our medical services, but I was involved with the hospital in Juarez that gave very high-level care to uninsured El Pasoans who couldn't afford care on our side. So it's a two-way street. So my experience has really reinforced my love of this place and how special it is. And sometimes I don't think we hold it up as special. We're not even aware of it ourselves.
And I don't want to be remiss in failing to mention, I spent 8 years as the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. And my involvement with Fort Bliss and our region and during the BRAC process that expanded Fort Bliss, well, I had the ability to deal with some of the finest men and women I've ever met in my entire life. And Adair's father was a 1945 graduate of West Point. That's how he got here. And so, and the military is an exceptionally important part of our community. It's our largest employer and always will be with Fort Bliss. So I didn't want to be remiss and fail to mention that because that was a great experience for me to learn more.
I think we would both agree it's all great experience. It's not like, this is so much work and we're, is it worth it? No, it is worth it. And it's the figuring it out, as he said, whether it's parenting or anything else, but giving it your all. It's working heartily as for the Lord. It's like, it's not just for you, it's for mankind and it's for your neighbor. So give it your all.
What do you guys, just maybe if you could pick one or two things, what do you admire most about each other? That's another question someone asked.
Well, to paraphrase what was in a movie one time some years ago, she makes me want to be a better person. She does balance me out. I am pretty hardcore, pretty driven. I had a nickname known as Bulldozer because I saw what I had to do and I'd do it. And the experience of the artists and the culture and the things that she's forced me to do has been beneficial. It balances it, and we truly do have a more balanced marriage and experiences as a result of, I can guarantee you, if I had been left to my own volition, I wouldn't have done half the stuff that she got me to do. It just wasn't I just was, I don't want to do that.
But on the other hand, if I hadn't been married to you, who knows where I would be wandering? It's like, so I'm grateful. It's like I need, I like Dee's stability. I like the fact that he did want our house to be, although I ignored him a lot of the time. But we balanced it out because he cared more for me to allow a lot of that to go on. He allowed me to turn our house into Grand Central Station. But Dee's always held firm to the things that matter most. It's like us as a couple. Like when President Bush was president, he said to me, he said this to me early. I had run Bush's campaign, and I was later asked what I wanted to do during his presidency. But Dee said to me early on, I didn't marry you to live apart. And so I'm thinking, I think you're crimping my style, buddy. But the fact of the matter is, by even saying that, I found where I belonged, which was chairing the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities, where I could stay at home, but commute. Of course, if you're commuting, you have to stay somewhere. Laura Bush is a friend, so I got the best dwelling place, going. So it worked out better for me, where at the time, I felt really trapped, like he wasn't letting me go do what I wanted to do. Well, by listening to him, I found what I wanted to do.
And it worked out.
It worked
beautifully.
out better than I could have crafted by myself. By giving, by listening to him, by realizing the relationship was most important than my going off and doing my own thing.
Right. And I have our final question. People want to know what's next for you, Dee.
Being a grandfather, there's nothing on the horizon at this juncture at all. I don't have any plans for anything. I never, it was hard for people to understand. I'm not a political animal. I didn't have aspirations for political office. That wasn't that's not whatever motivated me. I just wanted to, I'm a problem solver, and I wanted to, and I care about this community. That's really it. And after what we've been through the last couple of years, it's nice to have a little respite. And, I pray daily for our community, those that have been impacted by COVID, both from a physical and then the financial side as well. I mean, it's going to take a while to recover. And so if something comes along, I'll look at it if I can help, but I'm not planning on anything.
I like having him at home. We've rearranged these chairs so we sit in front of the fire. We can sit there, and so we've started sitting there together, and I really am enjoying that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being so open and candid with our audience, and we really appreciate all that you've done for our community, and I know that you're not finished. So thank you very much for being with us tonight.
We're not
Thank
going
you.
anywhere.
We're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching, and again, we appreciate your supporting the Tom Lee Institute by watching this broadcast, and you can share it when it's posted on YouTube with your friends and family. Thank you so much.